Today on TDC Comics, we'll be talking about my DC year and how we're going to go from the golden age of DC Comics to the new 52 in 52 weeks. Hey guys, today we're going to be introducing my DC Journey, which is a 52-week or one-year program where we're going to start with understanding the history of DC Comics in the Golden Age and kind of march through DC Comics throughout the years to end up in 2011 when they launched the New 52. What we're kind of calling this is the Golden Age to New 52 in 52 weeks. Or the course of a year. Now this program is inspired by My Marvelous Year, which was created over at Comic Book Herald. What those guys did was they used Marvel Comics and specifically Marvel Unlimited, which was an online streaming service offered by Marvel, where they have basically their entire library of comic books offered for free online. And what Comic Book Herald did was they marched 1 year at a time through Marvel Comics history beginning in the 60s and ending at current day, focusing on a single year at a time. We're going to do something similar here at TDC Comics, but instead we're going to march through DC Comics history using about a year to 2 years at a time for each week, starting with 1938 with Action Comics #1, the first Superman story. And we're going to begin there and march 1 to 2 years at a time for each week until we get to 2011 when they launch the New 52. We'll be reading about 10 to 20 stories each week, and what I mean by that is in the early years, a story for a given month was pretty much self-contained. But in the later years, when I call something a story that we'll read for a given year, usually that is more like a story arc, which may be multiple comic book issues at a time. The focus of the stories throughout the week will be to highlight a variety of different characters. So each week we'll try to highlight a Superman story, a Batman story, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Green Arrow. We try and get a variety of characters so that if you have one in particular that you like, or maybe one that you've never read before, this gives you the biggest breadth of characters that you can understand how they've evolved through time. With the 10 to 20 stories that are selected each week for my DC Journey, we try to focus on essential storylines. What are the storylines that have the most character development for Batman, for Superman? What are the storylines that really mold and shape who that character becomes throughout the decades? I want to give credit to the website Comics Alliance for this because they have some great reading orders and great essential storylines for many different characters in the DC universe. And that sort of forms the bulk of the storylines that we'll tend to focus on in the essential stories. They also have, in addition to essential storylines, some sort of backups for best comics of the decade, and we'll try and highlight those as offerings to read during the week as well. As I was starting to put together my DC Journey, I came to learn really quickly that there really wasn't a one-stop shop for anywhere to go to access the history of DC Comics stories through time. There is no Marvel Unlimited alternative that's offered by DC Comics. I think they're trying to do something like that with DC Universe, but kind of where we are currently, it's just not there in its full form. Now what I've done is I've gone through the history of publication at DC Comics and said, okay, from their Golden Age stories, their Silver Age stories, what are the most cost-effective way to read those stories? How have they been reprinted in a way that allows us to go ahead and focus on a couple stories each year and get a breadth of understanding for the character's history from Golden Age to New 52? My plan at the start of each month is to release a calendar that essentially shows what storylines we're going to be reading for that month to kind of allow you to have enough time to get out if you need to purchase some graphic novels or purchase some stories on Comixology, to look to see when they have sales or to try and get your hands on those books before it comes time to being that week when we're going to read those stories. Now, as you may guess, because DC Comics doesn't offer a simple streaming service like Marvel does for getting all their comic books available to the masses, it can be a little bit more expensive. And so what I'm going to try and do is provide sort of 3 different pricing tiers for how you could tackle sort of the My DC Journey in 52 weeks. The first pricing point I'm going to offer is essentially if you want to read everything, and really money isn't an issue. What I've done in sort of my projection, or what I'm anticipating for myself, is that it's going to cost about $1,000 to $1,300 to read all the stories throughout the year. Now the second option that I have is more of a budget-friendly build that costs about $500 to $600, about half as much as the first option. And what that does is it really just focuses in on what the most important or essential storylines are for that given year. Now the third option is an extremely budget-friendly build that only costs about $100 throughout the year, so only about $10 a month. And through that, we're going to be utilizing a lot more of borrowing books or finding budget ways to read books as opposed to buying graphic novels yourself to build out your own DC Comics collection. Now, because DC Comics doesn't offer currently a one-stop shop for reading all of its comics through history, we're going to have to get a little bit creative with what resources are available to us. The first resource that we have is Comixology, where they have an incredible comic book selection through time, where you can basically hop on there and purchase graphic novels, you can purchase individual issues, and we'll utilize Comixology for getting some of those harder to find stories in certain months of the year. The second resource that we have, other than just going out and purchasing a graphic novel for yourself or any of these collected editions, is to try and find a way to borrow them. And what resource I find is most useful and most cost efficient is to use Hoopla. Now, what Hoopla is essentially a digital library where you go to your local library and get a library card, and then you're allowed to rent titles or borrow titles electronically and download them to your computer for the month. This is extremely important, and I can't emphasize this enough, that in the more recent years, when we talk about reading essential stories, they boil down to reading story arcs, which are multiple issues at a time. And we may read 10 to 15 different stories, which would require purchasing 10 to 15 different graphic novels in the more recent years. And Hoopla offers those for free to borrow. So it's so much cheaper to access these stories, and it's such a cheaper way to get your hands on these important storylines. In fact, you'll see that if you're not all that interested in building a DC Comics sort of library or collection for yourself, we'll utilize Hoopla quite a bit for borrowing stories so that we can read those essential storylines in each character's history. The third option is accessing the comic book stories through DC Universe's streaming platform. Now, this is a great way to read those stories in high definition. The only problem I sort of see with that is that so far it's somewhat limited in what comic books are offered, and in addition to that, they rotate which comic titles are offered at any given time. So while I may mention them being available through DC Universe on any particular month, there's the off chance that those stories might get removed in favor of something else getting rotated into the streaming platform. So that's something you'll have to be a little bit wary of as we move forward. Again, so at the beginning of each month, we'll release the schedule for the month of books that we're going to read, and then we'll show which weeks we're going to read which comics. And then at the end of each week, we'll get together and we'll talk about the stories that we read. Which characters did we think had an outstanding week? Which stories did we like the most? What villains do we think had a good week? Which stories did we think were really influential for the characters that we know today? As I mentioned before, we'll pepper in a little bit of fun as we go, sort of some superlatives, best character for the week, best story, best plot, worst panel, things like that, and we'll just try and have some fun with it. And then at the end of each recap video for the week, we'll again go over the calendar for the upcoming week and talk about which stories we're going to read for that week. In addition to sort of having a monthly syllabus for which stories we're going to read available on YouTube, I'm going to also have a link on my YouTube videos to a Google document that outlines the stories we'll read, sort of what pricing you can expect for a given story or collected edition, and what the most cost-efficient way is to read those stories, depending on which of the pricing options you're most interested in moving forward with. Now at the end here, I just want to highlight some numbers of what you can expect as you move through your own DC journey over the next year. If you want to follow the sort of build your own collection, read as much as you can, that option number one, while it is the most expensive, you're going to be reading over 500 comics throughout the next year. So your DC journey is going to be extremely comprehensive, and you're going to get to read as much as you possibly could want about Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, all those DC characters that you've come to know and love. The next video I'm going to be uploading is going to go through the January 2019 schedule, which is going to begin with Action Comics #1, and we'll start to march through some of the golden age of DC Comics, specifically on Superman and with Batman. I am so excited to start my DC journey, and I really hope you guys are excited too. Until next time, this is Travis with TDC Comics signing off. Make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of our exciting content.